Today, we're going to talk about the events that led David from being an outlaw to being the king of all of Israel. How that happened and how the people responded to it, especially how the military responded to it. And we're going to talk about that today in an interesting set of verses in 1 Chronicles when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study, how to dig deep, how to apply it to your life. I'm here with my friend Kyle Grinstead, and Kyle and I are going to be continuing our overview of the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter by chapter. Let's say for sure it's that. We're not getting into every single verse, especially in these early chapters where it's a lot of names and that sort of thing. When you're studying this on your own, you can go through these names and not know how to pronounce them even, but look for things. And that's what we're trying to show you how to do today. We're going to do the 40 verses of the 12th chapter in the book of 1 Chronicles. And we're going to go in a kind of an examination of how God builds David from this outlaw to the king of all Israel, the covenant king, as we've talked about before. So you ready to get into this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Now, there's some interesting things we see right away. There's one really interesting verse that really stuck out to me. We'll get to that. But as we've seen in the past, the writer of 1 Chronicles is not interested in chronological order. We've seen a number of times he gets out of order. And he's basically trying to make a point that he's getting across to the people reading it, people that are coming out of the captivity of Babylon. And he's making those points, and he's not so worried about chronology. And we're going to see that today because in chapter 12, we see David in three different geographic contexts. We see him in Ziklag, we see him in the wilderness, and we see him at Hebron.
Okay.
And that's out of order because in the history of things, when David runs from Saul, he's all by himself and he runs to the wilderness and he's living in caves and he's by himself, and God begins to bring some people, and we're going to talk about that today, bring some people to him, and he gets finally an elite group of about 600 men, and that's in the wilderness. Then he goes to the city of Ziklag, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And at Ziklag, he functions and his army grows even more. And he has some experiences out of Ziklag. And then he goes to Hebron as the king of Israel. And and then over 300,000 soldiers come to him when he's in Hebron as the king. So we go from one outlaw to 600 elite special forces to an army of over 300,000 people, all in this chapter. And again, the order is not right because he's talking about Ziklag, and then he talks about the wilderness, then he talks about Hebron. We'll see that as we go and make some interesting observations here. Now, the first question I have for you before we read verse 1, because verse 1 mentions Ziklag. So the first question is, do you know where Ziklag is?
No, I actually didn't look that up.
Okay. This is a case where you're doing a Bible study and it mentions a city. You could say, I wonder where that is, because where it is might be able to help us understand what's going on. So I want to show you on a map. I'm going to show you two different maps here. The first one is all the nations, and we're going to come back to this map when we can see it. But these are all the 12 tribes. Now, right down here, we see Judah. Benjamin is here. That's where Jerusalem is. And then, let me zoom in a little bit. Jerusalem, then Bethlehem, then down in Judah here. Then we have Simeon. Remember, Simeon is completely surrounded by Judah. Now, and we have the city of Beersheba. And just for us, for reference, over here is Gaza. And this area right here is Philistia. This is not part of the 12 tribes. This is where the Philistines live and fight with Israel a lot. So we have, just to give us a place, we have Lachish, we have Bathsheba, we have Gaza, okay? And Simeon is here, Judah is here. Now, I want to show you Ziklag. Ziklag is right here. You see it? And if you pull out, here's Beersheba, here's Gaza, and here's Lachish. And then so you got here Judah, and up in here is Benjamin and that area. So Ziklag is an interesting place in that it's a city that is given to David by Israel's enemies. And I'll explain why. But right here is on the border between Philistia, right here, and Israel along in here. Judah, Simeon, Benjamin, Dan is up in here. Okay?
Okay.
Now that we've got that kind of placed in our minds, let's go to this first verse. Go ahead and read verse 1.
Now these are the ones who came to David at Ziklag while he was still restricted because of Saul the son of Kish. And they were among the mighty men of war who helped him in war.
All right. So you get mighty men who come to him in Ziklag. So this is after he's in Ziklag. Now I want you to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 27, verse 2. And I want you to read from right up here. I've got it marked. I want you to read from verse 2 to verse 4.
Okay.
This is how they got Ziklag.
So David set out and went over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to Achish the son of Maach, king of Gath. And David lived with Achish in Gath, he and his men, each with his own household, David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's widow. Now it was reported to Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he no longer searched for him.
Now Gath is this area. Remember, Gath is where Goliath is from.
Okay.
Gath is Goliath's hometown. And Ziklag is given to David because they say, oh, Saul is trying to kill you. You're an enemy of Saul. So we're going to give you this city so that you can attack Saul from the south, from Ziklag.
Okay.
And what he actually did was once he got to Ziklag, he and his 600 men patrolled and basically protected Israel's flank so that nobody else attacked Israel. In fact, the Philistines didn't attack Israel from there because they thought David was doing it.
Okay.
So we
have some deception, some war.
Exactly.
Deception.
So David got a kind of a foot in 2 places. He is an outlaw from King Saul. Saul is trying to kill him, has a death warrant out on him. But he takes this job basically because he can protect the nation of Israel, not necessarily Saul, but he can protect the nation of Israel against the Philistines who hire him to be their special forces. Okay? Interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
And so by the time they go to Ziklag, they already have 600 elite soldiers. Okay? That's the appeal. Yeah. That's why they give them Ziklag, because from there they can launch with these 600 soldiers and supposedly attack Saul from the south. So then we go into other verses, and we're going to see some interesting things about these guys that come to him in Ziklag, because in Ziklag, this little army grows to the 600 people. And here are the guys that come to him. And in verse 2, I want you to notice a comment about the men who come, the mighty men in verse 1, who come to help him in war. Go ahead and read verse 2.
They were equipped with bows, using both the right hand and the left to sling stones and to shoot arrows from the bow. They were Saul's kinsmen from Benjamin.
Now, the first thing that starts to happen is some of Saul's relatives from the tribe of Benjamin defect and go to David from Saul and start to fight with David against their own kinsman, Saul.
Wow.
Very interesting. And then it starts to name them. But it also talks about that they're equipped for a war and they're ambidextrous. That's this idea of they can throw stones with the right hand, sling stones with the right hand and the left hand. just like David. Remember, David could sling a stone, and they also could shoot arrows from bows. They were soldiers that were equipped for battle. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we're not going to go through all these names because they're just names that would relate to people coming out of the captivity. These are relatives, and they're relatives that are attached by area. The Gibbethites, the Jeterithites, okay? So they start to be men who come to him from areas. Now, if you look at verse 4, we saw this in the last chapter. We see again the structure of the army. This guy was a mighty man among the 30 and over the 30. We talked about this last time, that you get these 3 commanders. Each of the commanders is over 30 guys, and each of the 30 guys is over 30 guys. And it's mentioned here that this guy is one of the 30 who's over 30. So this is
Okay.
not one of the top 3, but he's one of the top commanders. So this is just the structure of the army. The war starts and is going along. A mighty man among the 30, over the 30. And you get these names down from verse 2 all the way down to verse 7. You get these defectors from Saul, the kinsmen of Saul who come down, right?
Yeah.
They're coming to Ziklag. Now, verse 8 down to verse 15 is a group of people that join him. And look what it says. Read verse 8.
From the Gadites there came over to David in the stronghold in the wilderness mighty men of valor, men trained for war, who could handle shield and spear, and whose faces were like the faces of lions, and they were as swift as the gazelles on the mountains.
Okay, in other words, they're soldiers. The other guys came with bows and slings. These guys have shields and spears, and they're mighty men of valor, men trained for war. Okay? But
Yep.
It's interesting. Up in verse 1, it says, men came over to David to Ziklag. Here in verse 8, it says, they came over to David in the stronghold in the wilderness. And you go, where's the stronghold in the wilderness? And this is where it's out of order. Because we saw they get Ziklag in 1 Samuel 27. And I want you to flip over to 1 Samuel 22. We're going to read 3 verses about this term stronghold in the wilderness. So go over to 1 Samuel 22:2.
Then everyone who is in distress, and everyone who is in debt, and everyone who is discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Now there were about 400 men with him.
Now, this is when David first runs. He's living in caves, and all these people who are basically disgruntled and disjointed and homeless start to come to him. And he gets 400 men. And that 400 men becomes 600 men by the time they're done in the wilderness. Now, I want you to flip over to 1 Samuel 23:14. We see the same term, stronghold in the wilderness. Go ahead.
David stayed in the wilderness in the strongholds and remained in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul searched for him every day, but God did not hand him over to him.
Now, this is before Ziklag. He's living in caves, and Saul is hunting him. Okay. Once he goes to Ziklag, Saul says, okay, I forget it. I'm going to quit searching for him. Now, flip over to 1 Samuel 23:29.
And David went up from there and stayed in the strongholds of En-gedi.
And see, that's the strongholds of En-gedi were these caves in En-gedi. They're still there. You can go to them archaeologically. They're still there and being excavated. And for a time, David is assembling this group of people in these caves in the wilderness. This is before he goes to Ziklag 4 chapters later in 1 Samuel. So it's interesting.
It's out of order. Yeah.
Ezra, the writer of 1 Chronicles, we think, doesn't care. He's trying to make a point, and the point is these men of valor who are coming to him. And back in our verses, we pick up from verse 8 down to verse 15. We talk about 11 guys who came to him from Gad. Now, back to our map, We're going to come to this map quite a bit, but here they're down here in the wilderness. And there are 11 guys who come to him all the way from Gad, all the way across, all the way down, and meet up with David down here in this wilderness of Philistia right here. So they come a long way. And these are just more of the troops that help build that 400 up to a group of 600 elite soldiers, okay?
Okay.
Just interesting what we can, with a map, we can start to figure out some things here.
Yeah.
Now, if we go over, in verse 14, it says, these are the sons of Gad, were captains of the army. He who was at least an equal to 100 and the greatest to 1,000. These guys were worth their weight. They could fight against 100 or against 1,000. Now let's go over here. Now I want us to notice the next group of verses goes from verse 16. Then some of the sons of Benjamin and Judah came to the stronghold. Benjamin and Judah is where Saul is. So these are more deserters from Saul, and they come down. And when they come down, David is not sure about their motive for coming to visit him. So if you read verse 17 and 18, we'll see something interesting. 17 is a challenge, and 18 is the answer to these guys that are coming from Saul's territory. Go ahead and read 17.
David went out to meet them and said to them, if you come peacefully to me to help me, my heart shall be united with you. But if to betray me to my adversaries, since there is no wrong in my hands, may the God of our fathers look on it and decide. Then the Spirit came upon Amasai, who was the chief of the 30, and he said, we are yours, O David, and with you, O son of Jesse. Peace to you, and peace to him who helps you. Indeed, your God helps you.
Now that's interesting. And it struck me as probably the most interesting verse in this chapter, because this whole chapter deals with armies coming to David. When he's in the wilderness, armies come, fighters. When he's at Ziklag, more fighters come. Then when he's in Hebron, he's the king in Hebron, over 300,000 soldiers from all over the 12 tribes comes down to fight for him.
Yeah.
And yet right in the middle of the chapter, you get a declaration by the kinsmen of Saul that King David is going to be a king of peace. Now, he's not a king of peace in his own lifetime. He fights his whole lifetime. So right in the middle of this chapter, you have a declaration. We're coming to you, David, out of a pure heart, because we recognize God is with you and you are a person of peace. Now, how does that make sense in this chapter and in First Chronicles? Why is that verse there?
If First Chronicles is tracking the line of Messiah, and we know that with Messiah comes true peace, maybe there's a connection through that.
Okay, yeah, I think so. This is the beginning of the kingdom that is going to lead to Messiah. This is how it got started. And it's really interesting. I called this video From Outlaw to King of All, because there are verses in this chapter that basically says in Hebron, he became the king of all Israel. So this king that's ultimately going to be the Messiah starts with one guy by himself running from Saul. And he runs and hides in caves, and people start to come. God brings people to him, and he creates a little army, and then he creates a bigger army, and then God brings more guys to him, and pretty soon he's a nation of Israel and king over all. And recognized, even though he's a soldier, even though he's done nothing so far except fight and bring soldiers to himself, men of valor who are equipped for war, he is recognized as a person of peace. It's kind of an interesting thing. For the guys that were coming down from Benjamin and Judah, they knew that Saul was after him. They knew he was running for his life. They knew he was fighting, and yet they call him, we know God is with you and you are a person of peace. Read that verse again. Let's go back to that verse. verse 18, this part here. We are yours, O David, and with you, O son of Jesse, peace, peace to you, and peace to him who helps you. Indeed, your God helps you. Now, the hymn of peace to him who helps you is a small h. It's not talking about peace to God who helps you. That would be capital H. This is, we're coming to help you, and we're coming to help you to gain peace for us because we're
Yeah.
helping you. We're going to be at peace with you, and your God helps you. Then David received them and made them captains of the band. So then you have, chapter goes on very quickly. From verse 19 down to verse 21, defectors from Manasseh who come down from the north. And the Philistines said, hey, you're coming to Ziklag to fight and you're from Manasseh? What happens if you decide in the middle of a battle to fight for Saul again? We don't trust you. So they stayed in Ziklag and helped him. And in verse 21, it says, these guys from Manasseh helped David against the band of raiders. And that band of raiders was in 1 Samuel chapter 30 when the Amalekites came in and took over Ziklag and took all their guys captive. So then 22, day by day, men came to David to help him until there was a great army like the army of God. And from verse 23 to the end of the chapter is the heading I've got here of the Mighty Men of Hebron. And this is where he starts getting big guys. And guys come from Judah, they come from Simeon, they come from Levi, they come from Benjamin, they come from Ephraim. These are all names that we saw on the map. They come from the half tribe of Manasseh, they come from Issachar, they come from Zebulun. They're coming from all over, and each guy brings a number of troops. So all he's recording is how God brings all these troops, and they go from one guy to 400 to 600 to over 300,000 men. If you add up all these figures, it comes to over 300,000. You get guys from Naphtali, you get guys from Dan, you get guys from Asher, Jordan, the other side of Jordan, the Transjordan we talked about, the Reubenites, the Gadites, the half tribe of Manasseh. They had over 120,000, all kinds of weapons of war for the battle. And they come to Hebron, where David is becoming king, and they throw a party. Now, what's interesting is, moreover, those in verse 40, those who were near to them, even as far as Issachar, Zebulun, and Naphtali, brought food on donkeys, flour cakes, fig cakes, raisins, wine, oil, oxen, and there was great joy in Israel. And if you read that and you go, okay, so they brought a bunch of stuff, but look how far it is. If we look where they come from. Up here, Naphtali,
all the way at the top,
Zebulun, Issachar, way up here, they come all the way down to Hebron, which is right here, to celebrate David being king. And it emphasizes over and over again, it says, he is the king of all Israel in Hebron.
Yeah.
So I just find it interesting that God is collecting this huge army to David the king, all the way from 1 to 300,000, and yet he's perceived as a king of peace.
Yeah.
Which ultimately his line will be the peace of Messiah. And that's the message to the people coming out of Babylon. You're going to have to fight when you go back to Jerusalem. Remember, the area around there is not going to be thrilled to see you. You're going to have to rebuild the wall and rebuild the temple with your weapons right there in case you're attacked. But you are building that as a city of peace. In fact, Salem is the word for peace. Jeru is new, the city of new peace.
That's cool.
Yeah. Now, next chapter is an important chapter because we start to see this line of Messiah and the temple joining together, and we're going to talk about the Ark of the Covenant. David starts to get the idea of the Ark of the Covenant, which Saul had forgotten about.
Okay.
Saul had not been faithful to honor the Ark of the Covenant. But David starts to get this idea, we ought to bring the Ark of the Covenant of God back to a central place we can worship God there where the Ark of the Covenant. Now remember, the Ark of the Covenant was built with the seraphim's wings touching on top. So that was to represent where the presence of God was.
Yeah.
David starts to say, hey, we need to get the Ark over here if we're going to start to worship correctly. And we get over the next 3 chapters in Chronicles starting next week, how the Ark came back and came ultimately into Jerusalem, into the temple. And we'll talk about
All
that.
right.
And that's where the line of David and the temple start to merge, because David is instigating the city, instigating the temple, instigating bringing the Ark back to the Holy of Holies. So we see this blending together in the book of First Chronicles. Make sense?
Yeah.
Any observations about this chapter? We went through it very quickly because I think the point was made.
Yep. Yeah, I think the one thing that we touched on it already, but I just thought it was interesting how you see almost all the tribes represented in the people who come to fight for him. But it wasn't just his
after
own
he's
people;
king.
it was after he's king. Yeah, it wasn't just his own tribe; it was everyone.
Yeah, at the beginning, when he's all by himself, people from his tribe came.
Yeah.
Then other people who were disenfranchised and the homeless basically started coming to him. And he was the person to go to for help and protection. And that grew into this army. They got a city of Ziklag, and the rest is history. They moved to Hebron, and ultimately they're going to move to Jerusalem, as we saw again. Last week, we saw this when the chronicler got out of order. And he went right from Saul dies and David becomes king, goes right to Jerusalem. Wait a minute, what about Hebron? He was in Hebron for 10 or 11 years. But Chronicles, again, is trying to make a point to the people, not trying to be a chronological record.
Yeah.
And we'll pick up next week with the Ark of the Covenant. We've been talking about the journey that David lived going from bandit to king and the trials that he endured during that period. I want to recommend a video to you. It's called, Why Do We Go Through Tests and Trials? It's out of the first chapter of the book of James. I think you'll enjoy it. And if you do, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the like button. That helps us. And listen, we're going to continue our study in First Chronicles next week. And until then, God bless you.